The elderly woman found a baby at her doorstep and raised him. Years later, he needed surgery, and what the nurse discovered during the examination left the elderly woman horrified. On an ordinary afternoon in the heart of the United States, Jeffrey was kicking stones along the dirt path that led to his home, a simple but warm place, thanks to the constant presence of his mother, Rebecca. Each step he took raised a cloud of dust, symbolizing all the rebellion he carried within him. As he approached the fence that marked the boundary of their small property, his gaze fixed on the weathered boards that Rebecca had repeatedly asked him to fix. "Jeffrey, I see you finally decided to look at the fence. It's time to fix it, don't you think?" Rebecca's voice, laden with cautious hope, echoed from where she stood, watching her son with a mix of anxiety and expectation. Jeffrey, with a heavy sigh of indifference, replied without turning to face her, "Oh, sure, because the fence is our most urgent problem, isn't it, Mom? Maybe if we spent less time worrying about appearances and more on things that really matter, you'd see what the real problems are here." His voice was a mix of sarcasm and frustration, reflecting his ongoing struggle to make his mother understand his perspective, which, in his view, was overly concerned with things that didn't deserve attention. Rebecca took a step forward, the concern evident on her time-worn features. "Jeffrey, it's not about the fence. It's about learning to finish what you start, about taking care of the place we call home. You may not see it now, but these small responsibilities teach important values." She tried to keep her voice firm, though inside she felt the painful emotional distance growing between them. Looking back at the fence, Jeffrey shook his head in disbelief. "Important values, Mom, like blindly following orders without question. Because that's what you're trying to teach me, isn't it? To obey, no questions asked." The rebellion in his voice was palpable, as hot and stifling as the air around them. Rebecca felt her heart tighten. "No, Jeffrey. I'm trying to teach you to be responsible, to care, but it seems every word I say only drives you further away." Her voice broke slightly, the emotion showing despite her efforts to stay strong. Jeffrey, realizing the impact of his words, hesitated for a moment, his rigid posture softening a bit. But pride and the need to assert his independence quickly resurfaced. "Maybe I'm distancing myself because there's nothing here for me anymore. Maybe I'm looking for something that this house, this fence, can never offer." With those words heavy with a bitter conclusion, Jeffrey turned his back on Rebecca, leaving her with her thoughts and the pain of seeing her son drift away, not just physically, but in heart and spirit. He was heading to the town center to meet some friends. Hours passed as Rebecca waited for Jeffrey at home, and the late afternoon finally arrived, as did Jeffrey, walking back toward the house he shared with Rebecca, his mother. By his side, matching each step with an attitude as defiant as his own, was Angela, his new girlfriend. With her hair carelessly thrown over her shoulders and clothes that defied the conservative norms of the area, she stood out against the simple backdrop of the small town. Her laid-back demeanor and the smile of someone who didn't care about the world around her complemented her quest to be a cool teenager. As they approached the house, Angela didn't hesitate to amplify her presence, her loud laughter breaking the usual evening silence. Jeffrey, although used to Angela's behavior, cast cautious glances toward the house, anticipating Rebecca's reaction to his unannounced guest. "Wait until you see your mother's face when we arrive. I bet she never expected you to bring someone like me here," Angela said, a clear provocation in her voice, as if challenging not only Jeffrey but everything and everyone representing the life he was trying to leave behind. Jeffrey responded with a crooked smile, part of him relishing the prospect of the shock his choice would cause, part worried about the consequences. "She'll survive. Just please, try not to be too much yourself, okay?" His request sounded more like a vain hope, knowing that asking Angela to moderate was like expecting the sun not to rise. Upon entering the house, Angela's presence immediately filled the space, her restless and uncontrollable energy palpable. "Mom, this is Angela, my new, let's say, friend who came from the big city. I hope you get along," Jeffrey announced with a mix of challenge and resignation in his voice. Rebecca, who had appeared from the kitchen upon hearing footsteps, stopped at the doorway, her eyes measuring the young woman before her. Rebecca's reaction was immediate, her maternal instinct alerting her to the potentially disruptive influence Angela could have on Jeffrey. "Nice to meet you, Angela. I didn't know we were having visitors today," she said, courtesy barely hiding her apprehension. Angela, on the other hand, didn't miss a chance to assert her presence. Oh, it was a last-minute decision. You know how it is, life on the road without many plans, she replied, lounging on the sofa as if it were her own home, her boots still dirty with dust marking the clean carpet. Rebecca noted the disrespect, each word and action from Angela, a direct challenge to the order she cherished in her home. "Jeffrey, could we talk in the kitchen, please?" Rebecca asked, hoping to have a moment alone with her son to express her concerns without causing a direct confrontation with the guest. In the kitchen, Rebecca was direct. "Jeffrey, I've always supported your choices, even when I didn't agree with them. But bringing Angela here without any warning and the way she behaves, it's concerning," Rebecca expressed, her voice laden with a mix of disappointment and worry. Jeffrey faced his mother, already defensive. "Angela is different, Mom. She understands what it means to want to escape this life that holds us here. She makes me feel alive," he retorted, his justification revealing more about his state of mind than about Angela. Rebecca sighed, realizing that the battle she faced was not just against Angela's influence, but against Jeffrey's growing desire for a freedom she feared he wasn't ready to face. "I just want you to be happy, Jeffrey, but I also want you to be safe and responsible. Angela seems to take everything lightly without thinking about the consequences. And that can be dangerous," Rebecca tried to explain, sincerity in her voice seeking some understanding from her son. Jeffrey kept his gaze firm on his mother, frustration and rebellion bubbling inside him. "Mom, you don't understand. With Angela, I feel I can be who I am, without judgments, without limits. That's what I want," he said, his voice carrying a youthful desperation for freedom and acceptance. Rebecca watched her son, her heart aching as she saw the chasm forming between their worldviews. She knew that arguing would only push him further away, but silence seemed like an agreement she didn't want to offer for that situation. "All right, Jeffrey, just be careful, please. And remember, don't let a friend or whatever she is take away your essence, your roots," she concluded, placing a kiss on her son's forehead in a gesture seeking to convey all the love and concern that words couldn't express. Back in the living room, where Angela was already exploring the few decorations with a nonchalant curiosity, Rebecca tried to adopt a more welcoming posture. "Angela, I hope you feel welcome. Jeffrey, why don't you show her a bit of the town before dinner?" Rebecca suggested, attempting to build a bridge, even if a fragile one, between her world and Angela's. Angela stood up, a wide and confident smile forming on her lips. "I'd love to see what your town has to offer." "Let's go, Jeffrey. I think it's time," she said, pulling Jeffrey by the hand with an intimacy that didn't go unnoticed by Rebecca. Something else seemed to cross Angela's mind with the sudden urgency to leave, but Rebecca couldn't guess what it was. As Angela pulled Jeffrey towards the exit, he paused, turning on his heels to face Rebecca with an indecipherable expression. Unexpectedly, he enveloped her in a hug, a gesture so rare that it left Rebecca paralyzed with surprise and emotion. "Take care, Mom," Jeffrey murmured, his voice muffled against Rebecca's shoulder, the intensity of the moment coloring his words with a meaning Rebecca couldn't fully understand. The hug, though an act of affection, carried an air of farewell, casting shadows of worry over Rebecca. Before leaving, Jeffrey seemed to remember something and went to his room, the sounds of zippers and the muffled noise of objects being packed into a backpack briefly invading the house's silence. Curious and slightly alarmed, Rebecca followed. Finding him hurriedly packing a backpack, she couldn't help but ask, "Jeffrey, what are you doing? Why are you taking that now?" "I don't want you to come back too late, so there's no need to take much. I only mentioned a walk around town." Jeffrey, caught off guard, closed the backpack quickly, turning to face her with an expression trying to hide his nervousness. "Oh, it's just that Angela and I plan to camp out tonight. You know, to see the stars," he invented quickly, his excuse sounding flimsy even to his own ears. Rebecca observed her son, suspicion taking hold of her heart. The hug, the packed backpack for more than just a night under the stars, something wasn't right. "Are you sure, Jeffrey? You've never mentioned anything about camping before," she insisted, her voice carrying a slight tremor of worry. Jeffrey just nodded, avoiding Rebecca's gaze. "It's Angela's idea, you know. Everything will be fine, Mom. I promise." Without waiting for more questions, he grabbed the backpack and rushed out, leaving Rebecca alone with a growing sense of emptiness and fear inside her. After the door closed behind Jeffrey, the silence seemed deafening. Rebecca walked slowly back to the living room, each step echoing against the floor like a hammer on her heart. She sat down, her gaze lost in the quiet of her home, now too big, too empty. "What are you planning, Jeffrey?" Rebecca murmured to herself, the words barely coming out in a whisper. Could he really be thinking of leaving? But why would he do that? And why now? Rebecca's mind spun with unanswered questions, the fear of losing her son growing with each passing second. I should have noticed the signs. I should have seen something was wrong. The possibility that Jeffrey might be planning to run away with Angela, abandoning his life, his home, and her, filled Rebecca with an unnameable dread. Why would he feel the need to run away? Wasn't I a good mother? Self-criticism and uncertainty assaulted her as she desperately tried to understand Jeffrey's motivations. She stood up, pacing restlessly. With each step she revisited every conversation, every look exchanged in recent days, searching for something she might have missed. Maybe I should have pushed less, listened more. Maybe there's something Angela offers that I couldn't give. As night fell over the house, Rebecca remained awake, watching the road through the window, hoping, perhaps against all hope, that Jeffrey would return, that he would walk through the gate under the dim streetlights, bringing her worries to a comforting end. But as the hours dragged on, turning into a blanket of darkness enveloping everything, Rebecca's hope began to dissipate like smoke in the wind. What if he really left? What if I've lost him forever? The thoughts whirled in her head, a maelstrom of fear and regret that found no rest. Jeffrey and Angela had taken a short taxi ride and settled in a small rental house in a neighboring town that seemed like an entirely new world for both of them. It was an improvised dwelling, far from the roots and rules Jeffrey so wanted to leave behind. The house, modest and a bit worn by time, became a sanctuary for the couple, a place where they could live by their own rules. One evening, as twilight gave way to darkness and only a dim lamp illuminated the kitchen where Jeffrey and Angela shared an improvised meal, Angela placed her hand over Jeffrey's, an unusual seriousness in her eyes. "Jeffrey, I need to tell you something," she began, hesitating for a moment before continuing. "I'm pregnant." The news hit Jeffrey like a lightning bolt. Pregnant? The word echoed in his mind, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, fear, and then, against all expectations, a sense of acceptance. He looked at Angela, whose eyes sought his for a response, a reaction. "You're pregnant," Jeffrey repeated. "We're going to have a baby." The following months passed in a blur of preparations, plans, and growing anticipation. Jeffrey, who had left his home with little more than a desire for freedom, found himself immersed in the imminent reality of becoming a father. He worked various temporary jobs, saving every penny for the baby on the way. Angela, in turn, transformed the rented house into a home, every corner reflecting the love and expectation for the new family member. The life Jeffrey had imagined for himself, free of responsibilities and restrictions, gave way to a new reality, one where he found himself eagerly anticipating the sound of a baby's cry, sleepless nights, and the small moments of pure joy. He often thought of Rebecca, wondering how she would react to the news. "I don't know if I should tell my mother about this. It's been months since I left that house without a word." Part of him longed to share his joy and fears with her, but pride and the distance created by his sudden departure held him back from making the call. When the day of the birth finally arrived, Jeffrey and Angela entered the hospital holding hands, a mix of nervousness and excitement in the air. Angela was quickly taken to the preparation room, and Jeffrey was left waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. Each minute felt like an eternity. Every step in the corridor made his heart leap, waiting for the news that he had become a father. The hours stretched on, each one slower than the last, until finally a doctor approached, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Congratulations, you have a healthy baby boy," he announced. And in that moment all the anxiety and fear dissipated, replaced by an indescribable joy. Entering the room where Angela rested, almost unconscious, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets, Jeffrey felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. He approached, looking at his son's face for the first time, his eyes filled with tears of happiness. "He is perfect," Jeffrey whispered, his eyes brimming with tears as he gazed at the miracle of his son. The little one, swaddled in a soft blanket, was a symbol of a new beginning, a new chapter in Jeffrey's tumultuous life. Angela, exhausted but radiant, smiled at Jeffrey, her eyes reflecting the same love and admiration for the life they had created together. However, the joy that filled the room was suddenly interrupted by a sharp, insistent sound from the machines beside Angela's bed. Jeffrey's heart froze. The heart monitor displayed a flat line, a sure sign that something was terribly wrong. "Angela?" Jeffrey called, his voice trembling, turning to her, but she didn't respond. Her eyes closed, her face pale. Confusion overtook Jeffrey, his mind unable to process the rapid change in the situation. "Angela!" he shouted again, louder, the urgency in his voice drawing the attention of doctors and nurses who rushed into the room. The medical team acted quickly, initiating resuscitation efforts. Jeffrey was gently but firmly moved aside, his hands still trembling, his eyes fixed on Angela, unable to look away. The cries of his newborn son filled the room, a distressing sound that seemed to echo his own despair. Despite the frantic efforts of the medical team, their attempts to revive Angela failed. The ensuing silence was deafening, broken only by the continuing cries of the baby and Jeffrey's muffled sobs, the reality of his loss too overwhelming to comprehend. Angela, the woman he loved, the mother of his child, was gone, leaving an immense void in his heart. The following hours were a blur for Jeffrey, marked by bureaucratic procedures and decisions he was forced to make amidst his grief. When it was finally time to leave the hospital, Jeffrey held his son in his arms, a small life that depended entirely on him, a living bond with Angela. Upon arriving home, the silence of the small rented residence was a cruel reminder of his loss. Sitting on the couch with his son in his arms, Jeffrey contemplated the baby's face, each feature a painful yet sweet reminder of Angela. "How am I going to do this without you, Angela? How can I be both father and mother to our son?" he wondered, the magnitude of his new reality sinking in. The baby's cries brought Jeffrey back to the present moment, a sharp reminder that despite his pain, he had a responsibility, a purpose. "I promise you, Angela, and you, my little one, that I will do everything I can. I will love you, protect you, and raise you to be strong and brave, like your mother," Jeffrey whispered, the words a silent vow in the quiet room. As the night advanced, Jeffrey rocked his son, softly singing a lullaby that Angela had chosen during her pregnancy. The pain of losing Angela was still a fresh wound, but the presence of his son offered some comfort, a reason to move forward, to fight, to live. In his heart, Jeffrey knew the journey would be arduous, and he wasn't sure if he could handle it alone. "But I don't know how to be a father. Maybe I won't even manage. Perhaps it's better for you to stay with someone who really knows how to raise you the right way." In the quiet of the night, as his newborn son slept peacefully, Jeffrey found himself in a whirlwind of emotions. The pain of losing Angela was still a fresh wound, bleeding inside him, a pain so intense it seemed to consume everything around him. Sitting at the kitchen table with only a dim lamp illuminating his actions, he made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. With trembling hands, Jeffrey began to write a letter to his mother, Rebecca. Each word was a testament to the love he felt for his son, Scott, and the unbearable pain of his existence without Angela. He explained how life had become a series of cloudy days, as if the sun had set never to rise again. The letter revealed Scott's birth, Angela's tragic death, and Jeffrey's agonizing decision to leave Scott in Rebecca's care. "Mom, you are the only person I trust to care for Scott, to love and protect him as if he were your own," Jeffrey wrote, tears smudging the ink on the paper. With the letter finished, he gently placed Scott in a basket lined with soft blankets. He got into the modest car he had bought with Angela's help and drove to Rebecca's house under the cover of night. Each step was an effort, a battle against the desire to turn back, to embrace his son and never let go. But the memory of Angela, the promise he had made to her in her final moments to protect and care for Scott, pushed him forward. Upon arriving at the house where he had grown up, Jeffrey carefully placed the basket at the door, the letter resting beside Scott, a silent plea for Rebecca to understand his decision. "I hope you can forgive me one day, son. I know you will be in good hands." Without allowing himself one last look, fearing his resolve would crumble, Jeffrey walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night, leaving behind his heart, his son. When Rebecca opened the door the next morning, she found Scott. The initial surprise quickly gave way to shock, and then to understanding as she read Jeffrey's letter. Each word was a blow, a revelation of the suffering and loss Jeffrey had faced, his inability to see a future for himself, but his desperate desire for a better future for Scott. With Scott in her arms, Rebecca cried, not only for the sadness of knowing Jeffrey was lost in his own world of pain, but also for the bittersweet joy of having Scott, a part of her son, with her. Amidst the tears, she made a silent promise to Jeffrey wherever he was. I will take care of him, Jeffrey. I will love Scott with all my heart as I loved you, and I will wait, always wait, for the day when you find your way back home. As the sun rose, bathing the room in its soft light, Rebecca rocked Scott, humming a lullaby she hadn't sung in a long time. The dawn brought with it a new hope, a new beginning, and the promise of an unbreakable love. Rebecca knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but she also knew that together, she and Scott could face anything. And maybe, just maybe, Jeffrey would one day find his way back to them. The years passed since that morning Rebecca found Scott at her door. She welcomed him without hesitation, filling the gap left by Jeffrey's departure with love and dedication. Scott grew up under Rebecca's attentive care, who strove every day to be both mother and mentor to him. The truth about his origin remained a secret known only to Rebecca, a burden she carried with love and sadness. Now at 5 years old, Scott was a child full of joy. His smile could light up any room, and his laughter, pure and contagious, was a constant in the house he shared with Rebecca. He had curious eyes, always looking for new adventures, and an intelligence that surprised Rebecca every day. "Grandma, why is the sky blue?" Scott would often ask, or "what makes the wind blow?" His questions were endless, and Rebecca did her best to answer, delighted by his thirst for knowledge. Rebecca taught Scott not only school lessons but also life lessons. She told him stories of their family, omitting only the painful part about his father, and taught him about the importance of kindness, honesty, and courage. "Scott, being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means facing your fears to do what is right," she would say, looking into the boy's eyes, who absorbed every word. As Scott grew under Rebecca's care, Jeffrey remained a distant shadow in the boy's life. He watched from afar, hidden in the shadows whenever Rebecca went out with Scott. Seeing his son play, laugh, and run filled Jeffrey with a mix of joy and pain. He marveled at how big Scott had grown, how much he resembled Angela, but each observation was also a reminder of everything he had lost. Jeffrey never approached, never revealed his presence. He was content to watch from afar, convinced it was the best for Scott. He is happy, he is safe, that's all that matters, Jeffrey thought, forcing himself to believe he had made the right decision by leaving Scott with Rebecca. But the longing for his son was a constant void, a black hole that sucked away his happiness. One afternoon, while watching Scott play in the park under Rebecca's watchful eye, Jeffrey wondered about the future. Will he hate me for leaving? Will he understand why I did what I did? These questions haunted him, and the uncertainty of whether or not to reveal himself to Scott one day tormented him. Rebecca, for her part, saw Scott's future with hope. She knew the day she would have to tell him the truth about his father was approaching, but she feared that moment. How can I explain Jeffrey to him without breaking his heart? She wondered, worried about the impact the truth might have on Scott. Despite these fears, Rebecca and Jeffrey, each in their own way, continued to love and protect Scott. Rebecca with her constant presence and unwavering love, and Jeffrey with his distant vigilance, each playing their part in the boy's life that united their destinies in ways Scott had yet to discover. More years passed. Scott, now 15, carried on his shoulders not only the genetic heritage of his parents, but also a rebellion that seemed to flourish with adolescence. He was a young man with a free spirit, with a thirst for independence that often put him at odds with the rules set by Rebecca. Their arguments, though intense, never crossed the line of disrespect, showing the deep bond between them. One hot summer afternoon, one of these arguments took shape in the kitchen, where Scott expressed his desire to go to a music festival with friends from school, something Rebecca saw as imprudent given the circumstances and the environment she knew to be full of questionable influences. "Scott, I'm only worried about you. That festival is no place for a young man your age," Rebecca tried to explain, her voice laden with concern and love. "But Grandma, I'm already 15. I know how to take care of myself." "You trust me, don't you?" Scott retorted, his voice rising in frustration. but his eyes revealing a desire for understanding, not confrontation. "I just want a little freedom to feel like I can make my own choices." Rebecca sighed, looking at the grandson who was growing up so fast. "I trust you, Scott. It's the world out there I don't trust." Deep down, she knew Scott's desire for independence was natural, but the fear of losing him somehow prevented her from letting go completely. It was in this moment of tension, with emotions running high, that Scott suddenly paled, clutching his sides with an expression of acute pain. "Grandma," he murmured, his voice a weak whisper. "Something is wrong. There's something wrong inside me. It hurts." Rebecca, immediately alert, moved closer to him. "Scott, what is it? Talk to me, my dear. Tell me what's hurting so I can help you." Concern colored every word as she watched Scott writhe in pain, trying to help but still unsure of what was happening. Without hesitation, Rebecca called an ambulance, accompanying Scott to the hospital, where he was quickly diagnosed. An acute kidney crisis, a condition that, as explained by the doctors, he had inherited from his mother. Angela had suffered from chronic kidney disease, a fact Jeffrey had mentioned briefly in his letter, but which Rebecca had never imagined would manifest in Scott. While Scott was being treated, Rebecca reflected on the ironies of fate, how history seemed to repeat itself in ways she could never predict. Why didn't I tell him about his father? About everything? Rebecca questioned herself, blaming herself for not sharing the full truth with Scott, perhaps preparing him better to face challenges like this. Scott, recovering in the hospital, looked at Rebecca with a new perception. The physical pain had brought to the surface a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. "Grandma, I didn't know something like this could come up in me. The doctor said it's hereditary. Did you know?" His question was laden with curiosity and fear, a plea for answers. Rebecca took Scott's hand, deciding it was time to open her heart and share the story of Jeffrey, Angela, and all the choices and sacrifices that had led to this moment. "Scott, there is much about your father and mother that you need to know. It is a story of love, loss, but above all, hope. And it starts with me, with you, and with a decision that changed our lives." While Scott was recovering in the hospital, the soft light of dawn seeped through the room, creating an atmosphere of calm and reflection. Rebecca, sitting beside his bed, took a deep breath before beginning to tell the story she had kept inside for so many years. "Scott, your father, Jeffrey, was a young man full of life and dreams, just like you, but he also faced many difficulties, internal struggles that led him to make hard decisions," Rebecca began, her words careful, trying to prepare her grandson for the emotional journey they were about to embark on. Scott, with an expression of intense curiosity and a hint of anxiety, listened attentively. "And my mother?" he interrupted, the mention of his father sparking a thirst to know more about his parents, about who they were, about the life they had before him. Rebecca nodded, continuing, "Your mother, Angela, was an incredible woman, strong and full of love. She and Jeffrey loved you more than anything, Scott. But unfortunately, she had complications after you were born, complications that took her from us very early." Rebecca's voice trembled with the emotion of reliving those painful moments, but she persisted, determined to give Scott the answers he deserved. "And what happened to my father after that? Why did he leave me with you, and why did he decide to simply disappear from my life without ever visiting us?" Scott asked, each of Rebecca's answers opening doors to new questions, new doubts. Rebecca then explained Jeffrey's agonizing decision to leave Scott in her care, how he believed it was the only way to ensure a better future for his son. "Jeffrey was lost in his pain, Scott. He thought he was doing the best for you, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness and the chance to watch you grow." Rebecca's story was interspersed with pauses, moments when Scott digested the information, sometimes with tears in his eyes, other times with a thoughtful look. "And he never tried to see me after that? To know how I was doing?" Scott's question was loaded with an emotional complexity beyond his age. "I am sure he watched over us from afar in some way, my dear, always ensuring you were okay but never getting close. That's just how your father is. I believe everything he did was out of insecurity for thinking he could not be a good enough father for you," Rebecca confessed. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, Mariana, who brought news about Scott's condition. "We need to consider a kidney transplant," she said, the seriousness of her expression preparing them for the gravity of the situation. The news fell like a blow to Rebecca and Scott, a cruel reminder that Angela's chronic kidney disease had left a mark, not only on the past but also on Scott's present and future. Rebecca, without hesitation, offered to be tested as a donor. "I will do anything for him," she said, determined. However, tests revealed she was not compatible, nor were any other family members or neighbors who, moved by the situation, offered to help. The search for a compatible donor seemed increasingly desperate, each negative result adding more weight to Rebecca's shoulders. "What are we going to do now, Grandma? I am very scared. I do not know what will happen to me. I wish my father were here now with you," Scott said, his voice weak but filled with a resilience that Rebecca knew he had inherited from his parents. Rebecca held Scott's hand, her expression firm despite the fear in her heart. "We will not give up, Scott. We will find a donor for you no matter what it takes. You are strong, like your mother and father, and we will get through this together." At that moment in the hospital room, with dawn heralding a new day, Rebecca and Scott faced the uncertainty of the future, but they knew that no matter how difficult the journey ahead, they would face it together. The love and determination they shared were unshakable, a force that united them against any adversity. "We will overcome this, Scott. Believe," Rebecca reinforced, a tender smile attempting to light up the shadow of worry on her face. What they did not know, however, was that a surprising event was about to change the course of their search. Something that would challenge their expectations and bring new hope to a situation that seemed increasingly bleak. Later that morning, news from the hospital would bring surprising news, starting a new chapter in Scott's fight for life. The sunlight filtered through the hospital curtains, bathing the room in a soft, comforting glow. Rebecca, sitting by Scott's bed, held her grandson's hand, lost in worried thoughts about the future. Scott's condition had become the center of her world, each day a mix of hope and despair. It was in this state of reflection that Nurse Mariana entered the room, looking at Rebecca, and began, "Mrs. Rebecca, we have good news. A compatible donor has been found for Scott. The surgery is scheduled as soon as possible," the nurse announced, her voice carrying a professional formality, but it was impossible to hide the hint of excitement. The news fell on Rebecca like rain in the desert. Tears of relief and gratitude welled up in her eyes as she squeezed Scott's hand, now awake and watching her with curiosity. "Scott, dear, a donor has been found. You are going to have the surgery," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Really, Grandma, I cannot believe it. We are really going to get through this. I am so happy," Scott exclaimed, a glimmer of hope lighting up his eyes, which for so long had reflected the shadow of uncertainty and fear. "Really, my love, God sent us an angel who we do not yet know, but who is willing to save your life," Rebecca replied, leaning in to hug Scott, her heart overflowing with joy and relief. As Rebecca and Scott embraced, wrapped in the renewed hope the news had brought, Jeffrey watched from afar, hidden in the shadows of his own life. The discovery of Scott's condition had been a shock to him, a painful awakening to how invisible he had become. Moved by a strength he did not know he still possessed, Jeffrey had taken the compatibility test, a silent step towards redemption perhaps, or at least compensation for years of absence. When the result confirmed he was the perfect donor, a complex mix of relief and fear invaded Jeffrey. He could save Scott, but at the same time he faced the fear of reopening old wounds, of confronting the past he had left behind. With determination, he made the decision to donate anonymously, insisting that his identity be kept secret. "For you, my son, I will do this with all the love in the world." The surgery was scheduled quickly, the medical team moving efficiently to take advantage of the opportunity that could mean a new life for Scott. Rebecca, grateful and still incredulous at the turn of events, prepared Scott for the procedure, encouraging him with words of love and promises of a bright future. "You are strong, Scott. You will get through this and come out even stronger, I have faith," Rebecca whispered, holding Scott's hand as he was wheeled into the operating room, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and faith. Jeffrey, from afar, sent his silent prayers, hoping that his decision would bring Scott the health and happiness he deserved. As Rebecca waited anxiously in the hospital, surrounded by the support of hospital staff, she felt a deep gratitude for the unknown donor, not knowing that he was closer than she could ever imagine. Inside the operating room, the medical team worked with precision and calm, each movement carefully coordinated to ensure the success of Scott's kidney transplant. Among those professionals was Nurse Mariana, whose experience had made her an observer of the small victories and moments of tension that characterized everyday life in the hospital. She watched the surgery, ensuring everything went smoothly, her gaze often resting on the young patient fighting for a new chance at life. As the surgery neared its end, the medical team began to relax, the first signs that the procedure had been a success becoming evident. Mariana, checking Scott's vital signs, allowed herself a discreet smile, sharing a look of relief and satisfaction with the surgeons. Another miracle today, she thought, proud of the work they were doing. When Scott was finally taken to the recovery room, Mariana followed, ensuring he was comfortable and stable. It was then that Rebecca, anxious and hopeful, was allowed to see him. Entering the room and seeing Scott slowly waking up, emotions overwhelmed her, tears of gratitude and relief streaming down her face as she approached the bed. "He is doing well, Mrs. Rebecca. The surgery was a success. We are all very happy and proud of Scott's strength. We are very surprised. It was not an easy surgery, but he handled it wonderfully," Mariana informed with a warm smile. Rebecca, unable to find words, just nodded, holding Scott's hand. It was then that Mariana, trying to ease the tension with casual conversation, commented without thinking, "Indeed, Mrs. Rebecca, it is wonderful that the father's kidney was 100% compatible. It is rare to see such perfect compatibility." Rebecca froze, her emotions interrupted by a shock of surprise and confusion. "What do you mean, the father's kidney? If you are talking about Jeffrey, he did not tell me he was here, that he came back." "This cannot be true," she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide as she searched Mariana's for an explanation. Mariana immediately realized her mistake. "Oh, I thought you knew. The anonymous donor was Scott's father. I am sorry, I should not have assumed," Mariana hurriedly said, concern marking her face as she realized her blunder. Rebecca sat down, stunned by the revelation. Scott, now more alert, fixed his gaze on his grandmother, trying to understand the conversation. "My father," he murmured, the news planting seeds of doubt, curiosity, and a glimpse of hope in his heart. They left the hospital that day full of doubts. In the days that followed, as Scott recovered, Rebecca and he faced the complex reality of their family. Scott, now aware of his father's existence and the sacrifice he had made, was consumed by mixed feelings. On one hand, there was a deep gratitude for this final gesture of love. On the other, many questions about why Jeffrey chose to remain in the shadows, why he had stayed away for so long. Rebecca, equally shaken, struggled to reconcile the image of the son who had left with the man who, anonymously, had given Scott a second chance at life. "He always loved you, Scott. In his own way, he tried to do what he thought was right," Rebecca tried to explain, her words bringing comfort but also leaving room for more questions. After years of silence and distance, Jeffrey made the hardest decision of his life, to face the past he had left behind and try to reconcile with Rebecca, the mother who had been left to care for his son, Scott. It was on a quiet afternoon while Scott was at school that Jeffrey finally found the courage to approach the house he once called home. Rebecca was in the garden, lost in her thoughts, when she noticed a familiar figure slowly approaching. Her heart raced as she recognized Jeffrey, the son she had loved and lost so many years ago. "Jeffrey?" Her voice was a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Mother, it is me. I need to talk to you," Jeffrey began, hesitant, his eyes avoiding hers, fearing judgment and rejection. "I know I caused a lot of pain, more than I can express, and I do not expect you to forgive me, but I needed to see you, needed to try to explain." Rebecca listened in silence, emotions flooding her, a storm of sadness, anger, and, surprisingly, a thread of relief at finally seeing her son again. "And Scott?" she interrupted, her voice firm. "Have you thought about him? He deserves to hear what you have to say. He deserves to know his father." Jeffrey lowered his head, accepting the truth in Rebecca's words, understanding the emotional damage he had caused both his mother and his son. "You are right. I want more than anything to have the chance to talk to Scott, to be a part of his life if he will allow me." When Scott returned from school that day, Rebecca gently prepared him for the meeting, explaining that Jeffrey wanted to see him. Scott, though surprised, agreed to hear what his father had to say. Scott's initial rejection was evident, his posture rigid and his words cautious as he faced the man who was a stranger to him, but also his father. "Why have you come back now?" Scott asked, his voice carrying the weight of years of doubts and uncertainties. Jeffrey took a deep breath, searching for words that could begin to heal the wounds he had caused. Scott, I know I made mistakes, that I left you when you needed me the most. I was lost in my own pain, and because of that, I caused you and your grandmother even more pain. But I want to try to fix that, if you will give me a chance. I do not expect everything to change overnight, but I hope that with time we can build something, a relationship perhaps. Rebecca watched from a distance, a mix of pain and hope in her heart. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew the family had a chance to heal, to rediscover themselves amidst the scars of the past. And somehow that was enough to take the first step towards an uncertain, but full of possibilities. Scott, I know that nothing I say now can change the past. I lost myself. I lost you. I lost us. And for that, I am truly sorry, more than I can express. Jeffrey began, his voice thick with emotion. Scott, his eyes fixed on Jeffrey, absorbed every word, every emotion conveyed. I always wanted to know about you, to know more about us. Why did you leave? Scott's voice was low but carried a deep desire to understand, to connect with the part of his life that had always felt missing. Jeffrey took a deep breath, meeting his son's questioning gaze. I was scared, Scott. Scared of not being good enough, of failing you as I failed your mother. But that is no excuse. I should have stayed. I should have faced my fears by your side. Their conversation flowed, words of pain, forgiveness, and hope intertwining, forming the fragile foundation of a new relationship. Scott, listening to Jeffrey's story, began to see beyond the absent father, began to understand the broken man who now sought redemption. I want to try, Dad. I want to try to get to know each other, to be a family and make up for all the time we lost. It will not be easy for me, but I think it will be hard for you too. I will make this effort for the family I always dreamed of having, Scott said, his voice firm and determined, marking the beginning of a new chapter for them. One day, on the porch of their house under the golden afternoon sky, Rebecca, Jeffrey, and Scott shared a moment of tranquility that seemed to seal their journey of reconciliation. Rebecca, looking affectionately at both of them, said, "This moment, the three of us together, is a dream I feared would never come true. My heart is at peace." Jeffrey, holding Rebecca's hand, responded, "Mother, the strength and forgiveness you have shown me, I only hope to offer the same to Scott. I am here for whatever you both need." Scott, smiling at the two of them, added, "I grew up imagining what it would be like to have a father. Now I do not have to imagine anymore. We are together, and that is all that matters. Thank you for allowing me to know this part of my story." And so, the family, once shattered by pain and regret, found themselves reunited, strengthened by their shared experience. Jeffrey, finally redeemed, Rebecca, the resilient matriarch, and Scott, the link that brought them together, moved forward together, ready to face whatever the future held with renewed love and hope. You have reached the end of this story. We invite you to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Do not forget to like the video that is about to appear on your screen. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep posting videos almost daily. We greatly appreciate your feedback. See you in the next video.